I was holding a small gift bag for my sister's baby, pale yellow tissue paper spilling over the top, when Deborah's voice cut through the entire room loud enough that every single conversation stopped at once. "You're a barren bitch," she said, pointing directly at me across my sister's living room. 30 guests frozen mid-sip of punch and mid-bite of cake. Sitting here pretending to be happy for Patrice while you can't even give my son a single grandchild. Everyone in this room can see it. Why don't you just admit it? I want you to understand exactly what was happening inside me in that silence, because it matters enormously to everything that unfolded over the following hour. I had lost 3 pregnancies in 4 years, each one privately, quietly, grieved almost entirely alone because I'd made the decision, each time, not to share that pain with anyone beyond my husband and one closest friend. I had never once told Deborah. I had never once told the room full of relatives now staring at me, waiting to see how I'd respond to being called Barren in front of my own sister's baby shower. My name is Angela Whitfield, and I stood there holding that small yellow gift bag, feeling 3 years of silent, private grief collide, all at once, with the cruelest possible public assumption about exactly why I didn't have children yet. Before I tell you what happened in the next 60 seconds, because my husband's response to what his own mother had just done is the single most important thing that happened in my entire marriage. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And go ahead and hit that subscribe button, because what unfolds over the next hour is going to leave you completely speechless. I noticed, in that frozen silence, my sister-in-law Regina standing just behind Deborah's shoulder, her expression carrying something I recognized instantly despite the shock still moving through my body. A small, satisfied stillness, the specific look of someone watching a plan finally, successfully detonate exactly as intended. I had no idea, standing there absorbing that public cruelty, exactly how much of it had actually been carefully, quietly engineered over months by the woman standing directly behind my mother-in-law. Or exactly how completely my husband was about to upend everyone's expectations about how this moment was supposed to end. Regina's small, satisfied stillness was the last thing I registered before my husband's chair scraped back loudly enough to pull every eye in that room toward him instead of me. But before I tell you what Marcus actually did in that moment, I need you to understand exactly what those 3 private losses had cost me, because I think it's the only way to fully understand the weight of what Deborah had just done. I want to take you back to the beginning, because understanding exactly what Marcus and I had built together, and what we'd quietly lost together, matters enormously to understanding why that public accusation cut as deeply as it did. Marcus and I married 6 years before that baby shower, both of us genuinely eager to start a family within the first couple of years, the way so many young couples imagine their future unfolding. I got pregnant for the first time roughly 14 months into our marriage, and I want to be honest about the specific, overwhelming joy of that first positive test. The kind of joy that makes you start imagining nursery colors before you've even told anyone the news. I lost that pregnancy at 11 weeks. I want to walk you through what that loss actually felt like, because I think miscarriage is a grief people discuss in hushed, brief terms without fully acknowledging its actual weight. It felt like losing a future I'd already started living inside my own head. A due date I'd already circled, a name Marcus and I had already quietly discussed, an entire imagined life that simply stopped existing over the course of a single devastating ultrasound appointment. I want to explain why Marcus and I decided, together, to keep that loss almost entirely private, sharing it with exactly one person outside our marriage, my closest friend, Denise, who'd walked through a similar loss herself 2 years earlier. We'd told a handful of family members about the pregnancy early on, eager and excited, and I remember, distinctly, the specific exhaustion of having to explain the loss to each of them individually afterward, watching their faces shift into careful, uncomfortable sympathy, fielding well-meaning but painful questions about what might have caused it. We decided, after that first loss, that we would wait considerably longer before telling anyone about future pregnancies, protecting ourselves from having to grieve publicly on top of grieving privately. I want to be honest that this decision, while protective, also meant that virtually no one in either of our families understood the actual scope of what we'd been through by the time of that baby shower. I got pregnant again 2 years later, considerably more cautious this time, telling almost no one beyond Marcus and Denise. I lost that pregnancy at 9 weeks, a loss that devastated me even more thoroughly than the first. Given how carefully we'd guarded our hope this second time, believing, foolishly perhaps, that caution alone might somehow protect us from experiencing the same grief twice. I want to be honest about the specific toll this second loss took on my own mental health during that period. I struggled with a depression I didn't fully name as such for several months, going through the motions of my daily life, while carrying a grief I deliberately isolated from almost everyone around me. Marcus was, throughout this entire period, an extraordinary partner. Patient, present, grieving alongside me in his own quiet way while never once making me feel pressured to perform recovery faster than I genuinely felt it. The third pregnancy, roughly 18 months before that baby shower, ended differently and in some ways, more frighteningly than the previous two. I experienced a partial molar pregnancy, a considerably rarer complication requiring a surgical procedure, and several months of careful medical monitoring afterward to ensure no lasting complications developed. I want to be honest that this loss carried its own specific fear alongside the grief, genuine concern for several months, about whether I'd ever be able to safely carry a pregnancy to term at all. My doctor recommended, following that third loss, that we wait at least a year before attempting again, using that time for additional testing and monitoring. I want you to understand what that recommendation actually meant for me. Sitting in that baby shower months later, I was still, at that exact moment, in the middle of the very waiting period my own doctor had prescribed, silently hoping, silently grieving, while an entire room of extended family assumed, without any real information at all, that my lack of children reflected some kind of personal failure or unwillingness rather than genuine, devastating medical loss. I want to walk you through why, specifically, Deborah and Regina had never learned any of this, because I think it matters to understanding the full weight of what happened next. Marcus had told his mother, vaguely after our second loss, that we'd experienced some fertility struggles, deliberately withholding specific details out of respect for how privately I wanted to grieve. Deborah, rather than responding with the compassion that disclosure might reasonably have earned, had instead spent the following months making increasingly pointed comments about grandchildren at family gatherings, comments Marcus and I had both simply learned to absorb quietly rather than explain further. I had no idea, sitting in my sister's living room holding that small yellow gift bag, exactly how much Regina had actually contributed to shaping Deborah's specific cruelty that day. Nor did I know exactly how completely my husband's next words were about to change the entire trajectory of both his relationship with his mother and our marriage's relationship with his entire family. I want to walk you through exactly how Regina's resentment toward me had developed over the years, because understanding the specific, patient cruelty of her manipulation matters enormously to understanding exactly what detonated in that living room. Regina, Marcus's younger sister by 3 years, had never fully warmed to me from the very beginning of my relationship with her brother. I want to be honest that I initially attributed this coolness to ordinary sibling protectiveness, the kind of cautious skepticism many people extend toward a new partner before genuinely trusting them. I understand now, with considerable hindsight, that Regina's resentment ran considerably deeper and lasted considerably longer than any reasonable adjustment period should have required. I learned, years into knowing her, that Regina had experienced her own difficult and complicated relationship history. 2 significant relationships that had ended badly, a marriage of her own that dissolved after just under 3 years, circumstances that I believe, though I want to be careful not to psychoanalyze her too definitively, shaped a specific bitterness toward what she perceived as my own comparatively stable, happy marriage to her brother. I want to walk you through the specific pattern of comments Regina made over the years, because I think it illustrates exactly how patient and calculated her campaign against me actually was. At family dinners, she'd occasionally mention, seemingly offhand, how some women just aren't cut out for motherhood, glancing pointedly in my direction while addressing the comment to the table more broadly. At my own baby shower for a friend's child 2 years earlier, she'd asked me loudly, in front of several relatives, when Marcus and I were finally going to get serious about starting a family, a question I'd deflected as gracefully as I could manage while privately grieving my second loss at the time. I want to be honest that I never confronted Regina directly about these comments, largely because Marcus and I had made the collective decision to keep our losses private, which meant I couldn't fully explain, to Regina or anyone else, exactly why her pointed comments landed with such devastating precision. I learned, considerably after that baby shower, exactly how deliberately Regina had spent the preceding months working to shape her mother's opinion of me specifically. Marcus's cousin Priya, who witnessed several of these conversations firsthand, later told me that Regina had been telling Deborah, repeatedly, over family phone calls and private conversations, that she believed I was choosing career over family, suggesting, without any actual evidence, that my lack of children reflected selfish prioritization rather than anything else. I want you to notice something specific about this manipulation, because it mattered enormously to what eventually happened at that baby shower. Regina never once asked me directly about our actual situation. She constructed an entire narrative about my supposed selfishness without a single conversation that might have revealed the genuine grief actually underlying our situation, then fed that constructed narrative to her own mother repeatedly, patiently, over the course of many months. I want to walk you through why Regina apparently chose that particular baby shower as the moment to finally push Deborah into a public confrontation. Priya later told me that Regina had specifically mentioned to Deborah, in the car on the drive to my sister's house that day, something along the lines of, "It's going to be hard for Angela today, being around a baby shower again. I just think it's interesting she never seems genuinely happy at these things." I want you to understand the specific cruelty embedded in that comment, because it wasn't simply careless gossip. It was a deliberate, calculated seed planted moments before the exact event where it would detonate most publicly and most devastatingly, timed specifically to catch me at my most emotionally vulnerable, surrounded by exactly the kind of baby-focused celebration that made my own private grief hardest to fully hide. I had no idea, arriving at my sister's baby shower that afternoon with a small yellow gift bag and a carefully composed, genuinely happy expression, exactly how thoroughly Regina had already primed her own mother to view my quiet, private struggle through the cruelest possible lens. I had no idea that the woman standing behind Deborah's shoulder during that public explosion had spent months constructing exactly the narrative that made such a devastating public accusation feel. To Deborah in that moment, like simply speaking an obvious truth everyone else was too polite to say out loud. I want to walk you through the hours leading up to that explosion, because the specific tension building throughout that afternoon mattered considerably to understanding exactly how the room reacted once Deborah's words finally landed. The shower itself began warmly, genuinely so, my sister Patrice radiant and joyful surrounded by close friends and family celebrating her first pregnancy. I want to be honest that I felt real, uncomplicated happiness for her throughout most of that afternoon. Genuinely excited to become an aunt for the first time, having spent the morning helping Patrice set up decorations and arrange the gift table. I noticed Deborah's mood shifting subtly as the afternoon progressed, small comments accumulating in a way I registered, but didn't yet fully understand the source of. She mentioned, during the gift opening portion of the shower, how wonderful it must feel to finally be starting your own family. A comment aimed at Patrice but delivered, I noticed, with a specific glance in my direction that felt loaded in a way I couldn't yet identify. I want to walk you through the specific conversation that immediately preceded Deborah's outburst, because it revealed exactly how carefully orchestrated that final moment actually was. Regina approached me during a lull in the gift opening, ostensibly refilling her punch glass beside me, and asked, with a tone I now understand was deliberately provocative, "Doesn't it get exhausting, coming to these things? I always wonder how you actually feel underneath that smile." I want to be honest about how genuinely blindsided I was by that question, uncertain in the moment whether Regina was offering clumsy, misguided sympathy or something considerably sharper. I gave some version of a polite, deflecting answer, unaware that Regina had, moments earlier, been standing beside Deborah, apparently continuing months of careful narrative building in the minutes immediately preceding the explosion. I noticed, in the specific way you notice things only in hindsight, Deborah's expression growing increasingly tight throughout those final minutes before her outburst, her eyes tracking me across the room with an intensity that felt different from her usual mild disapproval. I understand now, piecing together the timeline afterward, that Regina had used those final minutes specifically to reinforce, one last time, the narrative she'd spent months constructing, apparently pushing her mother toward exactly the public confrontation that followed. I was reaching to hand Patrice her gift, the small yellow bag I'd carefully wrapped the night before, when Deborah rose from her seat across the room with a suddenness that immediately silenced the nearby conversations. I want to walk you through the specific, visceral shock of watching someone I'd known for 6 years, someone I'd shared countless family dinners and holidays with, suddenly transform into someone delivering the cruelest possible public accusation about a grief she had absolutely no actual knowledge of. "You're a barren bitch," she said, her voice carrying easily across my sister's entire living room, every single guest freezing mid-motion. "Sitting here pretending to be happy for Patrice while you can't even give my son a single grandchild. Everyone in this room can see it. Why don't you just admit it?" I had no idea, absorbing that public cruelty in real time, exactly how completely my husband was about to respond to what his own mother had just done. Nor did I know exactly how much of Regina's careful manipulation was about to unravel in the very next several minutes, in front of the exact same room that had just witnessed my humiliation. I want to walk you through the full 60 seconds following Deborah's outburst, because every single detail of that minute mattered enormously to everything that happened afterward. I want to be honest about what I felt standing there, the small yellow gift bag still in my hands, 30 relatives staring at me in various states of shock and discomfort. It wasn't simple humiliation, though I understand that's what Deborah and Regina had clearly hoped to provoke. It was something considerably more complicated, 3 years of private, carefully guarded grief suddenly exposed in the cruelest possible way, in front of exactly the people I'd worked hardest to protect from that same grief. I felt my eyes fill with tears I hadn't given myself permission to cry in months, not since my most recent loss, and I want to be honest that some part of me, in that frozen moment, genuinely considered simply leaving the room entirely rather than facing the accusation directly. That's when I heard Marcus's chair scrape back loudly enough to pull every eye in the room away from me, and toward him instead. I want to walk you through exactly what he did in that moment, because it remains, even now, the single moment I'm most proud of in our entire marriage. He stood slowly, deliberately, crossing the room to stand directly beside me before he said a single word, his hand finding mine and holding it firmly enough that I felt, for the first time since Deborah's outburst, like I wasn't standing alone in that room at all. "Mom," he said, his voice carrying a specific, controlled anger I'd rarely heard from him in 6 years of marriage. "You need to sit down, and you need to understand exactly what you just did before you say another single word." Deborah, apparently expecting some version of quiet, embarrassed deflection rather than direct confrontation, seemed genuinely startled by her son's tone. "Marcus, I'm just saying what everyone's already thinking," she said. "It's been 6 years. People are allowed to wonder." "No," Marcus said, his voice rising slightly, carrying clearly across the now silent room. "They're not allowed to wonder because they don't know anything about what Angela and I have actually been through. You just called my wife Barren in front of her entire family, at her sister's baby shower, based on absolutely nothing except whatever Regina's been whispering to you for months." I want you to notice the specific moment Deborah's expression shifted at the mention of Regina's name, a flicker of genuine surprise crossing her face that told me, even in that chaotic moment, that she hadn't fully understood the extent to which her daughter had been deliberately shaping her perception of me. "Regina," Marcus said, turning to face his sister directly, his voice carrying a specific, devastating clarity. "I know you've been telling Mom that Angela's choosing her career over having children. I know because Priya told me exactly what you said in the car today. I want you to explain to this entire room, right now, exactly what evidence you actually have for that claim." I want to walk you through Regina's reaction, because it revealed, in front of the entire room, exactly the manipulation she'd spent months carefully constructing. She stammered briefly, some version of a defense that quickly collapsed under the weight of Marcus's direct question. Unable to produce a single actual piece of evidence for the narrative she'd spent months quietly feeding her own mother. I felt Marcus's hand tighten around mine, and I understood, in that exact moment, that he was about to share something we'd protected privately for 3 entire years, choosing, deliberately, to expose our own deepest grief in order to fully dismantle the cruelty his mother and sister had just inflicted on me in front of everyone who mattered most to us. I had no idea, standing there with my husband's hand wrapped firmly around mine. Exactly how much that next revelation was about to reshape not just that afternoon, but every single relationship in that room for years to come. I want to walk you through exactly what Marcus said next, because those words, spoken in front of 30 relatives at my sister's baby shower, marked the moment 3 years of private grief finally became something the entire family had to reckon with together. Angela has lost 3 pregnancies in the past 4 years, Marcus said, his voice carrying steadily despite the visible emotion underneath it. The first one at 11 weeks. The second at 9 weeks. The third was a molar pregnancy that required surgery and months of medical monitoring afterward. We didn't tell you, Mom, because Angela needed to grieve privately, and because every single time we've shared anything vulnerable with this family, it's turned into exactly this: public comments, pointed questions, and apparently whatever narrative Regina's been quietly constructing behind our backs. I want to walk you through the specific, visceral reaction that swept across that room as Marcus's words landed. I want to walk you through the weeks following that baby shower, because the specific, ongoing reckoning within Marcus's family mattered considerably to how genuinely things eventually healed, rather than simply being smoothed over with a single dramatic apology. Deborah called me 3 days after the shower, her voice carrying a specific rawness I hadn't heard from her before. I've been sitting with what I did, she said. I let Regina's narrative become my own reality without ever once asking you directly. I am so deeply sorry, Angela. I don't expect you to forgive me quickly, but I need you to know I understand exactly how much damage I caused. I want to be honest about how I responded to that apology, because I think it matters to anyone who's ever received genuine accountability after real harm. I told her I appreciated the apology, and that I needed time before I could fully trust that her behavior had actually changed rather than simply feeling temporarily remorseful. She accepted that boundary without pushing back, a response that, over the following months, helped me believe her contrition was genuine rather than performed. I want to walk you through Regina's own reckoning, because it unfolded considerably more slowly, and with considerably less immediate accountability than her mother's. She didn't reach out directly for nearly a month, and when she finally did, her apology carried more justification than genuine ownership, explaining her own painful relationship history, as though it excused months of deliberate manipulation against someone who'd never once wronged her. I want to be honest that I haven't fully reconciled with Regina in the time since, maintaining a civil but genuinely guarded relationship, uncertain whether real trust between us is something either of us is actually capable of rebuilding given the depth of what she'd done. I want to walk you through what shifted in my own marriage following that afternoon, because Marcus's public defense of me became a turning point in how openly we navigated grief together going forward. We made a joint decision in the weeks following the shower to be considerably more open with both our families about our actual fertility struggles, understanding that our previous privacy, while protective in some ways, had also created exactly the vacuum of information that allowed Regina's cruel narrative to take root so thoroughly. I want to be honest about how the broader family responded in the weeks following that shower, because the collective reckoning extended considerably beyond just Deborah and Regina. Several relatives reached out individually, offering genuine, uncomplicated support once they understood the actual situation. Several sharing their own private losses I'd never known about, creating an unexpected, healing sense of shared understanding I hadn't experienced before within this particular family. I had no idea, sitting through those difficult weeks of family reckoning, exactly how much stronger my marriage and my relationship with Marcus's more genuinely supportive relatives would eventually become. Nor did I know exactly what news I'd be sharing with this same family, considerably more joyfully, less than a year later. It's been 14 months now since that baby shower, and I want to give you an honest, full account of where things actually stand, including a piece of news I've been waiting to share throughout this entire story. I'm currently 26 weeks pregnant, considerably further along than I've ever previously carried a pregnancy, monitored closely by a specialist given my medical history, cautiously, carefully hopeful in a way I couldn't have imagined allowing myself to feel during that devastating afternoon at Patrice's baby shower. I want to be honest that I share this news not as some tidy, uncomplicated happy ending, but simply as an honest continuation of a story that included real grief alongside whatever hope has followed it. Deborah has become, Over these 14 months, genuinely present in a way I hadn't fully experienced from her before, asking thoughtful questions about my pregnancy without a trace of her previous entitled pressure. Attending every medical milestone appointment I felt comfortable sharing with her. I want to be honest that rebuilding trust with her took real time and consistent effort on her part, rather than simply happening because enough months had passed since her apology. My relationship with Regina remains genuinely complicated, considerably improved from the immediate aftermath of that shower, but still carrying real distance I'm not certain will ever fully dissolve. She's made some effort over these months toward genuine accountability, though I want to be honest that rebuilding trust after months of deliberate manipulation requires considerably more time than rebuilding trust after a single, if devastating, public outburst. If you've ever carried private grief while the people around you constructed their own cruel assumptions about your silence, I want you to hear this clearly. Other people's assumptions about your pain are not the same thing as the actual truth of it. Deborah looked at 3 years of my careful, private silence and filled that silence with the cruelest possible explanation. Encouraged by a sister-in-law who'd spent months constructing a narrative from nothing but her own resentment. Neither of them once considered that genuine grief, rather than selfishness, might be the actual truth hiding behind my quiet composure. Sometimes protecting your pain privately means the people around you fill that silence with assumptions you never had the chance to correct. And sometimes, when the truth finally surfaces, even in the most painful public way possible, it becomes the exact catalyst an entire family needs to finally see each other clearly. Deborah called me a barren bitch at my sister's baby shower, certain she was simply speaking an obvious truth everyone else was too polite to say aloud. She had no idea, in that exact moment, that she was about to learn the full weight of exactly what her son's wife had actually been carrying, silently, for 3 devastating years, and that the truth, once finally spoken, would change not just that single afternoon, but the entire trajectory of her family for years to come.